6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Real people, real issues, real life. Talk Recovery Radio. Live from the heart of the downtown east side, it's Talk Recovery Radio with Giuseppe Ganci and Darren Gaylor on Vancouver's Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. From the streets to the studio, bringing you addiction recovery stories from real people with lived experience and real experts on today's issues. Tune in live every Thursday, noon to 1. Powered by New West Recovery. Real people, real issues, real life. Talk Recovery Radio.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Talk Recovery Radio. Hey, Mr. Darren Gaylor, co-host. How are you?
Hello, Giuseppe. Good to see you. I'm great.
Good. Awesome. Same here. Same here. Keeping busy. A little bit of snow this morning, which was nice to see. I like snow. I actually spent the time with I'm Uncle G to a couple of kids, and I got to go to the mountain the other day. And I don't think COVID's a great thing, but you know what? It was kind of cool because of COVID. There was no one there, and they really reduced the number. We had our whole lane on the toboggan hill, and I've been there before. We had to wait like 20 minutes to half an hour in between going downhill. So it was kind of nice. It was like our own little private mountain. I was like, this is pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah. Got some exciting news, Darren. A long time ago, launched this app called Unity app. And, it was about 9 years ago now. And the creation of apps was kind of clunky and difficult unless you were like Facebook with all these, investors and everything with billions of dollars. So a little humble beginnings here. So anyway, we scrapped the Unity app a couple of years ago, but the idea still was there to somehow use technology for people in recovery, and got some exciting news. We've been working for about 2 years on an app called Better, and it's coming out very soon. Pretty much right now it's getting uploaded, but here's the catch. It's got all the features Better Unity app had, but there's a couple new features. So, one day meetings are going to go back to their regular, not these hybrid meetings in Zoom, and you're going to be able to stream your home group live from the app. No passwords, no meeting codes. I don't need to know you to know what the code is. So it really takes barriers away for people that want to access meetings online or digitally. And also you never have to use Alone Again. So Better has a feature where there's some other apps out there that help people overdose prevention where they connect with emergency services, but it seems like recovery apps, sober apps are over here, and harm reduction, overdose apps are over here. Nothing's bridging them together. This is an app where if you're in recovery, this has all these support tools, but if your sponsee relapses, the sponsee doesn't have to leave the recovery community to access harm reduction services. And if you want, you can be a peer volunteer and support people and volunteer to be a safety net monitor to help people not overdose. And you can use it anywhere in the world as long as you're using somebody local for your safety net. It's going to be a game changer. So, and maybe that person using is going to hear a speaker tape or visit the recovery wall and see an inspirational quote, or somebody reaches out to them and might get inspired to stop using.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. It's been a lot of work. So it's coming out very soon. Better. It'll be on your App Store, Google Play Store. So Talk Recovery Radio.
I want to get better. So
you want to get better. Feel better today. Yeah. Feel better soon.
I'm going to download Better.
I'll let you know when it's ready to go. 7 years of shows, hundreds of guests, thousands of listeners. This is Talk Recovery Radio, powered by New West Recovery, as you heard earlier in the intro. And we have two guests on today's show that we're pretty excited to talk to. So let's get right into it. Darren, who are we talking recovery with first today?
We are talking recovery with Dr. Harry Haroutunian, served as a physician director of the professional program at Betty Ford Center, known by patients and colleagues as Dr. Harry. You are an addiction recovery specialist, and you run the premier concierge medicine clinic in all of Southern California. Dr. Harry, thanks for coming on the show.
Nice.
Good morning.
It's an honor
Welcome.
to have you, sir. We're talking, you're also an author, and I'll just name the book. It's Being Sober, a step-by-step guide to getting to, getting through, and living in recovery. This is the ultimate question, defining what recovery is, what an individual's personal outcome. But let's frame recovery as an end result being abstinence, like free from alcohol and substances. What is it about getting to recovery that may block some of that? What are some of the hurdles about getting to, just right off the bat, someone needs help? What are some of the hurdles?
Let me first ask you, because there was a little delay as you spoke. I need to have the names of the people I'm speaking with.
My name is Darren.
Hey, and I'm Giuseppe.
Giuseppe and who? I'm sorry.
Darren.
Darren?
That's right.
Yes.
Giuseppe, Kisarich.
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you.
And Darren. Okay.
Yeah, sort of. We just sort of.
Like an old rock group from the 60s. I remember Giuseppe and Darren.
There you go.
I did some serious drinking over Giuseppe and Darren,
Great.
Look at the number one symptom of the disease of chemical dependency is probably denial. We once said to Betty Ford, what took you so long? Why did it take so long for you to find recovery, let alone set up a premier treatment center? And she said, well, because nothing was wrong. Of course, her family knew it, everybody else knew it, her doctors knew it, but the alcoholic or addict is usually the last to know. And the reason for that is it's a chronic organic disease of the brain. And one of the brain's chief functions is awareness. If as simple as this, my palm is facing down, my palm is facing up. That's a function of my brain's awareness called proprioception. You have to know something's wrong. And for most people, that cycle of using and relapsing and remitting is just, perfectly normal for them. We know differently. Yeah.
Giuseppe is going to love that response.
You already, I'm like almost like jumping out of my chair. There's actually a study in Canada called Life in Recovery that was done, and they did a survey of Canadians that have substance use disorder, I like to say addiction, and are in recovery. And the number one reason they didn't access treatment or recovery was denial. Stigma didn't even make the list. But yet you have all these government agencies and all these harm reduction agencies and everybody else saying stigma kills. And I'm like, what are you talking about? No, it doesn't. Like, it's denial. That's the number. I mean, stigma is part of the part of the issues, but like you said, it's not the number one issue. Nobody calls us and says, I don't want to go to treatment because I don't know what people are going to think. They're like, I ain't got no problems. It's my wife or it's my mom or it's my employer. They're the problem, and they hang up. So I appreciate you saying that denial is the number one issue. It is definitely something we preach on this show all the time.
With the all of the wonderful advances in addiction medicine that have occurred since the 50s, when this was labeled a disease, lots has changed. But one thing that hasn't changed still is the stigma. And remember that a lot of the treating professionals, like physicians who could stand to use an awful lot more training in addiction. I got more training in tropical medicine in Albany, New York than I did in addiction.
Right.
Okay. I could tell you about malaria and beriberi in Albany, but I couldn't tell you about the addiction that all the poor homeless people around the hospital had, because it wasn't, well, why? Because of stigma. And every one of those treating professionals has an Uncle Louie or someone else, a mother, grandmother, someone in their family that has given them either direct personal experience or they've surmised that this is a characterological flaw in people. It's a moral failing in people. Why don't we just treat it like diabetes and let it be a chronic organic disease of the brain that relapses and remits, and be done with it?
Right.
People will hide the fact that they've been in treatment for alcoholism or drug addiction all the time. But if they wind up at the Joslin Clinic at Harvard for the treatment of diabetes, they have no problem sharing that. If they go to the Mayo Clinic, they have no problem sharing that. I should say if they go to McGill, but anyway.
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, you discuss these advancements, these, new research, new studies over the years. You would think we would all have a common understanding, therefore a common solution or a therapy to this by now. And I think, those of us that talk recovery, I think that we all understand it in a very similar way, that it involves harm reduction components throughout. But like I said, the end result being, if you can be determined as an individual that can go without any outside medication at some point, then give it a try. But it seems that we keep hitting these blocks. For example, like, Suboxone, it wasn't, used for treating addiction and treating, or even inside the recovery realm anyways. And now it seems like there's developing this notion that if you don't prescribe it in the beginning for treatment, then you are doing a disservice. And where do you stand with that, with all your background and training? Should that be a part of training and understanding the beginnings of recovery?
I'm gonna ask you one question before that. Is your logo supposed to look like a hockey puck?
We are Canadian. Yeah, we are Canadian.
I treat a lot of Canadians, and many of them have taken a puck or two off the head, I can tell you.
Yeah.
But they're all dear friends of mine.
Is there a use?
If you want to change physician treatment behaviors, the easiest way to do it is not with education, believe it or not, as far as I'm concerned. This is just an opinion. The easiest way to change physician behavior is to threaten them with a lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the drug companies know that. They know that. And they know that if they create a new standard of care, if you don't use it, you are then liable or can do harm to your patient and your career. Then unfortunately, it takes that to make behaviors change. However, I do have this feeling that despite lots of arguments to the contrary, that opioid addiction almost behaves like a different disease. I mean,
what way?
Well, it's just, it gets in you like advanced
Physical.
alcoholism. It just gets that claw in you, and you're never free of that grip. Now, everybody can say that about alcohol and any other drug, but with my opiate addicts, they understand it in a way that doesn't give them that second step hope that we're always looking for. They're always waiting for the axe to fall. What Suboxone does for many people is takes the axe away. I love that.
Right.
It allows them to spend a little less time looking over their shoulder at when am I going to relapse, and a little bit more time looking forward to a brighter future. Suboxone retains more people in recovery. It makes them more comfortable, and it prevents opiate-related overdose death.
For post-acute withdrawal, it's definitely a tool. I have a problem when a physician is saying that this is probably a lifelong necessity, and
I'm going to tell you something. Let me tell you a little aside. I don't know what kind of time you have, but don't let me be too verbose. I mean, I too had to learn I'm a straight up 12-step guy. I wrote about AA and the 12 steps in my books. And, I know that this is a spiritual disease that needs a spiritual awareness and transformation to make it work. But we can't neglect that it's also physical and mental and sociological.
Absolutely.
That being said, that I had a nephew, a very dear nephew, and he was a horrible heroin addict who was constantly left by his friends on emergency room doors from one overdose to the next. So I knew he was going to die. And by the grace of God, he got into a methadone clinic, got from 120 milligrams of methadone in a year, and took him almost 2 years to get off the last, 10 or 15 milligrams. Sounds like Suboxone in many ways.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, his life starts changing. He starts sending me pictures of a 1-year chip, a 2-year chip. He had a divorce. It was a friendly and amenable. He has a house, and he rises to the top of his company. So I called him one day and I said, you got to tell me, why is this going so well for you? He says, Uncle Harry, I was sorry, I didn't speak to you, but I was afraid to tell you that I was on Suboxone. And then, at the 5-year mark, well, actually 3-year mark, he got a graduated taper from Suboxone that's worked, and he's been completely drug-free and in recovery from his opioid addiction now. I think he just took his 8th chip.
That's pretty awesome.
And that made me a believer in Suboxone. The only time I keep Suboxone going longer, originally it was a pain medication in France. Okay. And so if I find someone with the element of chronic pain that's not going to go away, Suboxone is a form of harm reduction that warrants long-term care.
A bit of a disclaimer here too for our viewers and listeners. So this conversation is exactly what we like to hear. It's here in Canada, there's some pretty top doctors, Dr. Christy Sutherland, Dr. Patricia Daly. They go on the national circuit in Canada. Their direct words are, if you're an opiate addict, you must be on Suboxone for the rest of your life, no matter what. And there's no dialogue after that says, hey, but if you want to taper, let's build your recovery capital, or let's do long-term kind of services. Suboxone has no taper policy in Canada. I know because I'm on lots of committees. So here's the thing. If you're a pilot, a nurse, a doctor, or a lawyer, or you just come from a pretty big trust fund, you're going to go to a private treatment center and you're going to get a taper program eventually. And one day, you might be off the substance or off Suboxone. But if you're poor, there's no way in heck your funded doctor is going to taper you off Suboxone. It just doesn't happen in Canada. So we try to use this show to really remind Canadians, like, there's a 2-tiered system. If you're rich, you're going to get this type of model. But if you're poor, which Sutherland and Daly are the physicians for, like, you're just on OAT for the rest of your life. But that's a discussion that could take another hour. Just wanted to throw that disclaimer in there. I want to talk about your book, want to talk about, sobriety and so forth. And I got a feeling that you're a person with lived experience, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So what, you got Steve Tyler in your book as well and so forth, which is awesome to always have. What's the goal of the book? And is it, I read it, it's for family members, it's for people still using, it's for everybody?
When I was in treatment, I couldn't put my critical self to bed. And I read this funny book they gave me. It was called Alcoholics Anonymous. And we had stupid old-fashioned language, and it had no pictures. It was kind of like reading the Manhattan phone book. And so I said, maybe there's a way that especially young people and families can get this information in a more simplified, readable fashion. And that was really my original goal. When I rewrote the 12 steps in there, I'm not, of the ego state that I can rewrite the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. But the first step really means there is a power that wants to kill you. And there is a power that wants you to live. And I have to decide in the 3rd step if I want to live or die. The newcomers understood that before they could find that's exactly what the big book was saying. Okay. And turn your will over to your higher power in the 3rd step wasn't so understandable for people who just didn't think they had any will, and let alone a high power. So, do you want to live or die? They understood. And it is also a turning point for people who relapse. They seem to turn around at that third step. And when they relapse, they are making that decision. I know it's a chronic disease that's fatal if I reactivate it. If I reactivate it, I'm saying that I really want to take a chance on dying and not necessarily want to live. I'll begin it again. It's something that every relapsing addict has done many, many times. So the book was made for that simple approach, but also so that I could have the family members who are far too often undertreated. They're all the collateral damage, understand exactly the same stuff that the addict was getting. Right. So that there could be conversation about it, so that there could be recognition of someone else in the family, oftentimes that is going down the same path. So that's pretty much what I wanted to do. And I wanted to put a little bit of humor into it, because if you don't make recovery fun, young kids are not going to do it. I mean, go to an AA meeting with, old men who are pissed off that they can't smoke in the meetings anymore. And sometimes you get an Suboxone, you can't talk about that in here, get out, that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, fortunately, it's few and far between, but it still exists every now and then.
I'm wondering, it's hard to define, one case. It's so complex. There's so many different examples of types of people, what they're addicted to. But so let's speak generally, whether it's a businessman addicted to alcohol, whether it's a young kid that still lives at home, a street entrenched individual. Is there a general minimal sort of time frame that somebody should be away from their family, their work, their routine, whether it's treatment or something? Just should they be away, ideally?
Every case is individualized, and I shun any cookie cutter approach to this. Every brain is different. Every situation is different. Well said. That being said, I believe that a 28-day program, which was invented really by insurance companies, is very short-sighted, and that people, in my experience, who need a 10-day detox are still detoxifying for that 28 days. So their brains are just getting ready to absorb the knowledge at the time of discharge. And they go back into a stressful situation. That's a horrible model. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to try to find the resources to stay in treatment for 90 days, but I do say that the real work of recovery is the aftercare program. And that's what we do here. We have tailor-made aftercare programs that will stay with all of our patients at least for 2 years. And it's all based on the best published data. Evidence-based medicine for this disease comes from the HIMSS program for airline pilots and the Federation of State Physician Health Programs in something called the Blueprint Study. And they say very clearly in there, and this is evidence-based, that if you treat physicians or airline pilots for 90 days, get them away from work for 3 to 6 months, and then put them in an aftercare program. In this case, they're, like a physician like myself was in aftercare for 5 years, that your success rate is 78% without ever a relapse. If you take those people who have one relapse during that time, and because they're being monitored with urines and other tests so closely, they get right back on the horse and back into compliance with their program, that number goes from 78% to 91%. And I know nothing. I know no treatment centers, no fancy schmancy crap that even compares with that. Mm-hmm. So we try to implement that for all of our non-licensed people and non-professional people with good aftercare programs. And usually they're insurance-based, like IOPs and stuff that are affordable.
It's the missing link. It's that continuity of care, because what happens in treatment is super important. But this is put on by a treatment center called Last Star Recovery Society, open ended. People live here for 90 days to 2 years. Urban setting, connection is key. Events are a big deal for us. Like, we organize Recovery Day. Last Recovery Day before COVID, we had 30,000 people on the streets celebrating Recovery Day. And what does all that energy do? It keeps people sober. Yeah, it was a big party, but those new guys that were in treatment were just like, this is recovery. We're like, yeah, it is. This is what we do. You make life a big deal. And one of the big projects we're working on is getting every Canadian to have their recovery capital assessed, and to continue getting their recovery capital assessed post-treatment. So all these interventions that we're doing, and AA does, and NA does, and sponsor, like all these interventions, how is it improving your overall health? I mean, some people are like, why do you bother, doing a teeth program at Last Door to help people with their dentistry? It's like, it's just as important as Suboxone. That's why, people want to look good, feel good, and it's their overall health. And, hopefully that transcends into the States. It's like, what's your recovery capital score 90 days post-treatment? And try to find those trigger points. And it's all about connection, what you're talking about. These pilots, these airline attendants and physicians, like, it's not just going to group for an hour. It's about connecting to the peers in their group and still staying connected to what they're
And
being
isn't
connected
that
to.
the best definition for spiritual recovery, is connection?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So-
Because when
Yeah.
before you show up, you think nobody cares, and then you realize, yeah, they do.
You guys know what you're talking about. I like this.
Awesome. Yeah.
I think we have time for. I want to ask you.
Yeah,
this.
we got time, Darren. Yeah, we got time.
I mean, I want to focus on the living in recovery aspect of the title of your book, because I don't know. I think there's a lot of ignorance around. Hey, I'm in recovery. Why? Because I went to a meeting, or you know what I mean. And it is a component to it, I believe. But what is it that what's the psyche of the individual, that's whether they started on through harm addiction, wherever what are they doing? What are they working on? What's the spiritual process that an individual that is getting through grief, that is experiencing difficulties in day-to-day life, but maintaining a desire to move forward in a benefit way? Is there something that we're doing that can't be related to reading a book, going to a meeting, speaking?
When we get a chance, I'll have Amber, my secretary, send you guys a copy of one of my. Did I disappear on you?
Yeah, your video disappeared. Yeah.
There
you are.
I'll have Amber send you a copy of what one of my lectures is called, the Recovery Audit.
Okay.
Oh, I'd love it.
Okay. And one of the things that you have to audit in recovery is, am I just abstinent or am I sober?
Right.
And one of the ways to look at that is to never miss the opportunity to get small. That's going to keep me safer than anything. I have to remain teachable. I have to take advice. I have to not be the only person to offer an opinion of how I am today. I'm going to look to my sponsor or someone else for a little idea. I mean, I used to suit up with a necktie and my little Betty Ford director badge and think that I was cool and okay, until I called my pizza making sponsor back in Vermont, and he says, "Wait, listen, idiot, are you sure you made that amends yesterday? Are you getting too big for your britches? Are you staying?" So it is critical that people understand that if we're addicted, we're in a culture of addiction. Our friends are addicts. We're thinking about nothing more than recovery is a cultural change. I'm moving into a whole new culture. And if I'm going to move into that culture, I want to be involved with health, good connection, good citizenship, a set of principles to operate on that start out with honesty, and know that one day at a time, I can try my best to be the best that I can be with the gifts that God or my higher power or your higher power or the mountain or the sun gave me. And if I have that kind of relationship that I'm just a tool of the higher power put here to be able to spread this around and help another person who's ready for help, some who are not so ready for help. I'm doing just about everything that I can to qualify for the label that today I am in recovery. Tomorrow morning, a whole different story.
Yeah.
I tell people it's nobody's business but me and my sponsor what the number on this coin is. When someone asks me, well, how long have you been sober? I usually like to say, since I've been off my knees this morning.
Right.
And that puts me on the same plane with anybody else at that point in time. Right now, we all have the same amount of recovery because we all did that this morning. That's about the best answer I can give you, I think.
The part of the I just want to focus on what you said about citizenship. Like that is truly, something that really needs to make it into the healthcare narrative that's going on. I know in the States as well, with cities like Portland and other harm reduction cities, we're forgetting about citizenship. What's happened here in Vancouver, I don't know if you've ever been to Vancouver, but it's in big trouble. And it's kind of turned into where the success rate is considered on breath. And that's it. Like, as long as you're still breathing, then a successful program. No one's ever died at Insight, which is a claim that's great. But the question is, how many people have died early that use Insight? No one's asking that question. No one's asking about citizenship on what's going on in the downtown east side. And I'll leave with this with you. We toured Dr. Golau. He's the drug czar of the Portugal model. And we actually flew him to Vancouver, and he's part of a conference I was part of, and walked him around, and he said something really key. And I know that you're a big player in the States, so I want you to hear this. He said, I know what you've done wrong here in Canada. In Portugal, the responsibility of citizenship is still the addict's responsibility. It's very clear in this neighborhood, you've left the responsibility of citizenship up to the government. Free drugs, free needles, free haircuts, free food, everything's free, do whatever you want, and people are falling apart. And the idea for me, what recovery is being citizenship, having an understanding of that. I didn't know what citizenship was before I got here. I thought the government owed me, for me being alive. If we can just get that out there, it's like, breath is great, but we need more than breath as an outcome to our healthcare policies, because if we forget about that, people are living not their best life. And I got a feeling that you're on the same pathway with us. Recovery is supposed to give you the best life possible, not just, hey, I breathed today. It's like, yeah, we want to make sure people are breathing, but we can't just leave them there. And that's what I feel healthcare has become. Thanks for writing a book about being sober. It just reminds people that this is possible. That's what this show's about. Like, there's more to life than just, not using and holding on to your chair,
The thing about recovery is it's supposed to be infectious. And, although you are the great benefactor of recovery, all of those who love you and surround you should all have equal, if not enhanced, benefit from just being around you in that state. Better person, better caretaker, better lover, better citizen. Yeah.
Fantastic. How can we get your book?
We'll send it up to you.
Not me personally, the world watching.
I would like to say that I've never made a dime on my book. We make it a practice to try to give one away for everyone that's sold. And so it's been distributed in jails and to the underprivileged and people who can't afford the book. It's available on Amazon.
Okay. Awesome.
Very easily. Being Sober, Dr. Harry. My love for people to read it. Thank you.
Thank you
very much, Dr. Harry, Haroutunian, and the book, Being Sober, A Step-by-Step Guide to Getting Through, and Living in Recovery. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Hope to have you on again soon.
Well, don't have me on. Bring me to Vancouver for your next conference. That would be a lot of fun.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Beautiful, beautiful city.
Awesome.
Right, boys. Thanks
take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And we're still listening and here with Talk Recovery 100.5 FM on the Vancouver Co-op Radio, and also here on Facebook Live. And right into our second guest of the show.
Yeah, we're talking about being a parent of a video game addict with Jeffrey Munn. Hello, Jeffrey. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for having
I'm
me on.
Yeah, welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. We've been talking recovery for about being sober. Everybody
Hmm.
thinks about addiction, alcohol, drugs, alcohol, drugs, alcohol, drugs. And then every
Hmm.
once in a while you hear about video gaming. Huge issue. I work at a treatment center kind of behind me here. Video game is somehow made its way into many people's lives and a full-on addiction. What do you say to people that say, oh, it's just video games, not that big of a deal?
Well, what I like to say to them is that it really, I don't like to focus too much on the actual thing that is the subject of addiction, but rather the relationship that the person has to the thing. So, if somebody is can't stop eating brown mustard and it's impacting their lives, then it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is the relationship that it has in their lives, or the role that it plays in their lives. So, video games, there are many people who have the experience of not being able to control or moderate their video game use.
Mm. So you wrote a book. It's called Parenting a Video Game Addict: Strategies for Helping Children Addicted to Video Games. So I must ask, are you a video game addict, or was your child a video game addict, or?
I was essentially raised by Nintendo, or the old Nintendo Entertainment System.
Okay.
It was a primary coping skill for me when I was growing up, and yeah, it became a compulsive thing for me where it was one of my most powerful escapes, and it became kind of a crutch to the point where I was unable to function in school and social life because I was so preoccupied with video games. And that lasted into adulthood, and still to this day I have to be careful what I start playing, because I can get hooked. I can get hooked in, and it can start to take priority over things that are more important.
So you're the video game addict, and this book is lived experience for you as giving tips to parents. Is that
Yeah.
so? Yeah.
Yes, well, me also as a video game addict, and also working with clients. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and so
Okay.
I've worked with many adolescents and adults and kids, all ages, who have compulsive gaming and other compulsive behavioral addictions. And the truth is, a lot of they all share some very fundamental patterns.
Mm.
So,
It,
Well, sorry, Darren, but Darren's a father of two boys that are
mhm.
growing, and eventually, their fingers are going to be moving around tablets a lot more quicker
if they haven't
to
already.
yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you parent a video game addict? Some tips.
Well, the first thing is to determine whether or not the child is really addicted, and addiction is a spectrum, right? It's not black or white. So there's certain levels of control that children have. Almost all children are going to have some difficulty moderating their use of electronics and video games. That just comes with the lack of impulse control that children have. Um, but if it seems to be something that they rely on to soothe their emotions, to emotionally regulate, if when they're taken away, the child becomes very irritated, dysregulated, upset, temper tantrums, things like that, that's when there's some red flags, and you want to start looking out for that. One of the most important things to do, though, is to just identify and empathize with the role that the video games are playing in the child's life. So a lot of parents, if you think back to the old days when people even had less of an understanding of video games and what they were about, parents would say things like, "Oh, get off that; it'll rot your brain." There was this huge disconnect between parents and their kids when it came to video games. And at least in my experience, and the experience of many of my clients, when that happens, they don't feel heard, and they just feel like the parent is an adversary, and they don't want to listen. They just feel like they're the parents, this person that just doesn't understand what I'm going through. They think this is some stupid thing I'm just choosing to do just to upset them. And the truth is, I think being able to empathize and relate to the child and be like, I know this is really something that provides you a lot of comfort and a lot of relief, in age appropriate terms, depending on their age, is an important place to start.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that, the book, directed towards parents, there must be a lot of responsibility needed for the parents themselves to change, maybe before addressing the huge concern of my son in his bedroom and giving me attitude. Like that there's just something, you know, systemically wrong in the family dynamic. And what do you see as is it difficult to say that to the parent?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head with it, that it's almost always a systemic issue. And that what's really hard for parents is to tease apart the difference between it being a systemic issue and it being their fault. Right? Parents go straight to, if you say it's a systemic issue and everyone needs to rearrange their place in the family in order to create healing, parents, especially if they're, you know, insecure and feeling guilty about their own potential failures, go straight to, oh, so it's my fault. And it's like, no, 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 no. It's a system. You are part of a system, and if the whole system changes, the odds of success are much greater.
And I mean, generally speaking, the, you know, is it difficult for the parents? Is there resources, or is it sort of just different ideas and suggestions for them, you know, to gauge their willingness and see if there's different outcomes, you know, for them trying something new?
Meaning in terms of me talking to them and
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like to take a very experimental sort of approach to therapy. I mean, like, let's try this. Let's see how this works, because it is trial and error. You know, some children are going to respond to certain approaches much more than others. Some children need very much hardline rules. Okay, we have to remove this. You can't play any video games. You can't have access to them, although that's getting harder and harder now with devices being everywhere.
Yeah.
But, you know, we have to remove this. You can't play at all except these specific times. There are some children who, if you impose some rules and predictable consequences and are firm and consistent, they will respond to that. So it is a process of trial and error for each individual child, family.
You know, addiction, disease, some people say it isn't, some people say it is. You know, there's that whole conversation out there, and you know, there's so many, like, you know, the disease of heroin addiction, video game, alcohol. There's all these different pathways to wellness and so forth. So it's really complicated. You know, like you say, you treat everybody with like trying things. You know, abstinence for video game addiction is pretty complicated, because there's, you know, everyone has a cell phone. I knew a guy that actually went to our treatment program that decided to get an old phone so he wouldn't be able to do any kind of gaming on his phone. I'm not sure. That was 4 years ago. We'll see where he's at right now. I think he's still doing pretty good. But we've had other video game addiction, video game addicts. Do you like that word, video game addicts?
I don't like to get too hung up on words and labels. Okay. I mean, I use the word addict in the books that I've written about addiction. I always describe addiction as the person's experience of not being able, feeling like they're unable to stop. Yeah. Now, when you start getting into, you know, semantics and, you know, is it technically addiction, and are the same neurological processes happening in the brain between a video game addict and a cocaine addict and this and that. I don't, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't get too involved in that. What I worry about is the person's subjective experience. And so I'll use that word, but I don't like to make too big of a deal out of it. I call it a compulsion, an addiction, a unhealthy habit, whatever works.
Yeah. There's a common theme for people in recovery too, where you just spent the last 10 years, you know, finding means and ways to get your next fix. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden you're not doing that anymore. Right. And there's three things that kind of creep into, especially in men's lives. I can't speak for women. Either, you know, you're eating 10 bananas and 5 chicken breasts for dinner, and you're going to the gym twice a day, and, you know, all that. Uh-huh. Or there's, you know, it's just a friendly poker game. and which turns into, you know, a big gambling addiction. And then video game, it's like I'm not doing the grind anymore, so I've got all this time, so we start video gaming. What kind of preventative, is there any conversation in your practice? You know, I don't have so we like to say you don't have a gambling addiction yet. So
Right.
what kind of preventative ideas do you have for people that I don't have a video game addiction today, I'm just playing?
Right. So mindfulness is a huge part of it. Just being aware of your habit and how it may be changing. We are usually the worst, at least in my experience, at determining that ourselves. So it's helpful to have somebody that you're accountable to. You know, luckily for me, I'm married, so I'm going to hear about it if I start playing
Yeah.
video games too much. Whereas someone who's living alone, on the other hand, it's hard, you know, because it's a insidious thing where you just start playing more and more and more, and then it becomes, you know, just all consuming, and you didn't even see it coming. So in terms of preventative things, being aware, being vigilant, and also understanding that the process of addiction or compulsion or whatever you want to call it is a self-soothing mechanism. It's something that people are doing to try and regulate their emotions and cope with life in ways that they've learned work, at least in the short term. And so the preventative approach to that is to learn how to manage and soothe your emotions in real time as they come up, you know, and that's a preventative measure for all kinds of addictions. So not just
Hmm.
video games, but, you know, to avoid seeking more self-soothing and more escapist type behaviors, you practice proactive emotional regulation.
I mean, exactly. To say to some family, like completely misunderstanding their child with the video game attachment, and feeling powerless and feeling useless as a parent, not knowing how to communicate with them. Like, to say, well, at least he's not doing heroin,
Right.
isn't helping anybody. Like, everybody, it's all relative. It's a struggle for all of us. I mean, it's good to understand addiction, period, you know.
Sure.
And but I can appreciate, when we talk about the relationship to something that potentially could become moderate or moderated in use, versus something that has to stop right now. Is there a lot of the parents, that their end goal is they want their child to never use it again? It's a problem. And is there a lot of discussion around just simply boundaries around moderation, and
Yeah.
like you said, experimenting with something different?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think a lot of the parents understand that that's going to be a hard fought road to go for abstinence. I think a lot of, especially parents who don't play video games or anything like that themselves, I think there's a tendency for them to go straight to, you just can't have this in your life. And, you know, I'm never going to say to a parent like, nope, that's not going to happen. But I will gently encourage them to, like, well, let's see what else. Let's meet your child where they're at
Yeah.
right now and see where, you know, what steps we can take to at least reduce the harm. You know, harm reduction, I think, has a place, especially when it comes to something that's this sort of a behavior like this that has more gray area.
Do you
I don't know if
find
that answers your question.
it does? Absolutely. And I'm just curious, like, as a parent, these questions are running through my head. But,
Yeah.
like, with your experience, I mean, you have a master's degree in clinical psychology. It says here you've been you're sober yourself, so you have your own experience. And, like, is there something typical about a parent? And again, not specific, like, we're not talking addiction to video games. Let's just say that with a child that's detached from them, are they very rigid in their relationship with their children? Are they playful at all anymore? You know what I mean? Have they gotten lost in the career and just time away, and seem, well, let's just say it, uninterested in their child. Is there a
like, is that a common pattern that I see? And there's, I can't really speak to that specifically. I haven't seen any particular patterns there. I think there's often a disconnect of some sort. Although I see that in a lot of families these days, just with how much everybody's struggling to make ends meet and make time for their family and make time for themselves. And so I don't know how much that's specifically, related to the addictive cycle. I think a lot of it is, when it comes to why a child becomes addicted. I mean, you'll see siblings, twins even,
yeah,
in the same family with hypothetically, theoretically, the same type of upbringing, and one becomes completely addicted to video games and one plays like a regular, like a normie, if you will.
yeah,
And so it has the addiction itself absolutely creates a rift between the children and their parents.
I like a little bit of a philosophy that we do here at the program I work at, where it's just like, let's not spend time figuring out why you're
Right.
addicted to video games or why you're addicted to heroin.
It's so complex.
Let's just figure out like how to live without it and be,
Right.
Able to do that. Because once you figure out why, then what? You know
Right.
what I mean? What are you
Right.
gonna do? It's like, oh, that's why, and all that.
Right.
So
And there certainly is sorry to interrupt, but there certainly is a place for that in terms of treating trauma, grief. There are things that may be unresolved,
yeah.
but at the end of the day, there's only, you could identify every single thing that contributed to you wanting to numb out, and it's not necessarily gonna.
It's not necessarily. So you wrote a book, but you also have a blog, Practically Sane. Want to spend a couple of minutes? I love the title, Practically Sane.
Thanks.
So it's a blog, and
Yes.
is it just a recovery and addiction, or is it a blog on many issues? What's Practically Sane?
So it's a work in progress.
Okay.
I blog maybe once every couple of months right now. I'm really trying to make it more of a regular thing, but I'm trying to focus mostly on secular recovery from addiction and just general mental health. So not even necessarily addiction, but the focus is mostly secular recovery.
Okay.
Because I feel like there's a big need for that.
Okay. And for our viewers that have no idea, what does secular recovery even mean?
Meaning, so a lot of the recovery approaches currently, especially if you've been exposed to the 12-step program, there's a lot of emphasis on God.
Yeah.
And this works for a lot of people. My approach is not to, to put down that approach or anything, but just to offer an alternative for people who don't believe in God or any supernatural being, and want a more psychologically based approach to recovery. Just,
Okay.
when we're letting go and letting God, what's happening on a psychological level? What's a secular, non-religious, not necessarily non-spiritual, because I believe you can be spiritual without religion.
Without God,
but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's an important conversation, because everybody gets hit with that as soon as they show up to a treatment center that has the 12 steps in it. And all of a sudden, I sure as heck wasn't a God person when I showed up to the doorsteps of a detox center, 13 years ago. I remember being I got interventioned on, and somebody asked me, if I believed in God, and I was like, how dare you? It's just a crazy world, from then and now. So Practically Sane, a blog that's up and coming to we'll have to get you back on the show to talk more about secular recovery. It's been a topic on this show before and so forth. So great on that. The book is called, go ahead, Darren.
Such a common conversation, like even as a member of the 12-step community, like it's so flippant sometimes to just say, well, you got to turn it over to God, and it's constant. What do you mean? Like, what do you mean? And I'm, as a non-religious person myself, I'm often seeking and searching my own understanding of, that's, what does that mean? How do I make sense of it? And it's a very much involved, part, especially we've come, how many hundreds of years beyond that, the initial writing, that we need that as part of the conversation for you know,
Mm.
to make it even more inclusive, but also, you know, to have a different option for somebody that just cannot get past that. And yeah, I appreciate that. You even wrote a book. I was just trying to find the name. Is it
It's Staying Sober Without
being
God.
sober without God? Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get a note on that one.
Well,
Okay.
the
That's
next
my main book. I very rarely get asked about my video game book, so it was like, hey, it
Oh,
was,
well, that's
it was
well,
nice to get some attention for that one as well. But by
yeah.
far, my most popular book is The Staying Sober
Well, we're
Without
gonna
God.
have to get you back on the show so let's not talk about what that book's about. To all our viewers and watchers and listeners on Talk Recovery Radio, we'll bring you back on the show. You know, we've also got another Canadian that wrote a book similar to that, so maybe we'll make it a full hour of Staying Sober Without God. Hey, Darren, what do you think? Yeah, we'll do that in an upcoming show.
Again, I'm not saying I don't have a definition of God in my life, but I feel like I've been staying sober without God.
Yeah.
You know, in that sense, since the beginning. I mean, yeah. So definitely.
Parenting a video game addict, one of the many books author Jeffrey Munn has written, along with his blog, personal stories of a video game addict. So giving tips to you if you're a parent and you're listening, Google parenting a video game addict, Jeffrey Munn, and get some strategies in your life on how to initiate potentially some form of wellness or recovery into your child's life, and not only will they get well, but this will also get parents well. I mean, that's something,
It's a big focus of the book.
Everyone's like, how do you help my son? Well, how about you get some help first? We actually got about 2 minutes. That's a huge thing, and it's right at the end of the show to bring this up, but parents need to get well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the way I try to reframe it that seems to be helpful for parents is to say, by getting well, you are helping your kid. There's this feeling of I'm neglecting or I'm abandoning my kid if I focus on myself, if I go do something for, recreation or something enjoyable. I'm abandoning my child, or I'm not paying attention. And the truth is you have to maintain yourself so that you can be available to your child.
Excellent. Thank you for being on the show. You're listening
Thanks
to Talk
for having
Recovery.
me.
Yeah, thank you. You're listening to Talk Recovery Radio. We come to you live every Thursday, noon to 1. We're a week behind schedule on the radio because of COVID. The studio is still closed, so that's why we're in this platform on Zoom. You can replay us Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever your favorite streaming device. Go to talkrecoveryradio.com and replay all of our past shows. 7 years, Darren, going on to 8 years, hundreds of shows, thousands of guests. Thanks for listening. Bye, Jeffrey.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Okay, take care, everyone. See you next Thursday.